A staggering 28% or more of food waste just goes to a landfill, completely wasted. Absolute tragedy, and sitting right here is one of the best ways to repurpose that and throw it back in the garden. But there are a ton of myths and misconceptions about composting, which we're going to bust in today's video. Myth number one is that compost smells bad. Honestly, that smells fresh, that smells sweet. Why? Because it's a well-managed epic pile of compost. A poorly managed pile will smell bad. That's your signal that you're doing something wrong. There's about 4 things you can do wrong. Number 1 is you've built the pile incorrectly, so it's very compacted and there's anaerobic pockets in the pile. Anaerobic means lack of oxygen. Compost, this is an aerobic hot composting process. So anaerobic, you'll get these bacteria that smell, honestly, like doo-doo. They do not smell good whatsoever. So you'll need to rebuild the pile to troubleshoot that. You can also have too many greens. That's probably the more common one. Sometimes too many browns can smell, too wet of a pile. And then finally, you can add fats, oils, meats. Some of these things that are often recommended to not put in compost, they can rot out and have a sort of sulfuric foul smell. There's actually a method of composting that works really well for those fats and meats called bokashi composting, which is an anaerobic process, and we've done a full video on. Misconception number 2 is that a compost pile has all sorts of bugs in it, all sorts of rats and rodents and vermin, and yeah, that can be true. I'll address the bugs first. In a proper hot composting pile, you have at least a 3 cubic feet area or 1 cubic yard. We'll put the meters up on the screen. In the center, you're gonna have most of that heat generation. At the edges, it starts to go a little colder, and that's where some of those larger decomposers like your worms and your pill bugs and your arthropods start to come in. So that's actually quite normal to have bugs around the perimeter and at the bottom of a compost bin. Now, rats and vermin, that's a little bit of a different story. There's different ways that you can prevent that. One would be using a compost tumbler or a fully screened in situation. And then you'll get things like maggots in compost and all sorts of different sort of creepy crawlies that they might be a little unsightly for you. The best thing I can recommend for that is to cover with straw or leaves to try to keep them out, maybe add a little bit more browns. But all this to say, it's really not as big a deal as I think you might think. And half of those, the bugs, are actually kind of good. The biggest myth that keeps the most beginners from really getting into composting and having a great time with it is that they think it's too complicated. They think they need some sort of fancy recipe or process to really get perfect compost. For example, you need a 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, so you need to calculate the ratio of your greens and your browns, then put them all into a spreadsheet and figure out the perfect blend and then raise it to 160 Fahrenheit 3 times to make sure it's broken down. You could do that, you could, and certainly I have some friends that love getting that deep with it. I actually really enjoy that part of the process, but to get started, you could take something as simple as 50% greens, 50% browns, and throw them in a pile and forget about it, and that still counts as composting. The 4th myth is that it just simply takes too long to get perfect compost as the output, and it's just not worth it. And while that can certainly be true, if you want to get really wild with it, I'll give you the recipe. I'll give you the thing to follow. It's called the Berkeley method. It's one that works really well for an actively managed hot compost pile. So what you'll want to do, take greens, take browns, roughly by volume, put them in at 50-50, and then turn that pile, make sure it's nice and aerated. And then you'll want to heat it up to 130 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 days. Then after that, take a fork like this, come on in and turn it every 2 days for 14 days. And then in about 18 days, you'll have really well broken down compost. But like I said, that's actively managed hot compost. If you're a home gardener who doesn't want to get that deep into it, you can do something like I'm doing right here. I've got a compost thermometer in here. This was at about 150 to 160 Fahrenheit for maybe a week or so, and now it's slowly cooled off to, I don't know, about 80. And what I'll do, if I want to restart this pile and break it down a bit further, is move it on down this row here and just sort of rebuild the pile that way. And by the time it gets to the end, it'll be pretty damn close to a finished compost. But I'm not stressing, because this part of the gardening process for me, I like to take it a little bit easier. One of the more pervasive myths is that hot composting will completely and totally kill off any weed seeds that you find in the garden and toss into the pile. Take this guy right here. The idea is that if I throw this in, just let it be, these are gonna be dead, and I can then freely spread that compost without fear of spreading the weed seeds. It's true, but you have to heat that pile up to 140 Fahrenheit for over 36 hours and make sure all those seeds are in that hot zone. And as we've learned, that just might not be your composting journey or your particular process. One powerful thing that you can do is get to them before the seed heads form in the season. Cut them all out of the garden, maybe a nice rainy day where the soil is nice and loose, pop them in a pile, let them completely die and dry out, and then work them into the pile. And actually, weeds are weirdly a gardener's best friends. We have 6 different tips on turning these into garden gold on this video right here. As always, if you want awesome gardening products that have been tested by us that we love, they're on our shop.epicgardening.com, and our seed company, Botanical Interests. Until next time, good luck in the garden and keep on growing.